Here goes. This is going to be another, well, a different sort of analysis of good old Harley Boy, Karl Marx. And but what is that going to entail, really? I was thinking about it, and it seems to me that Marxism has had its fun. Capitalism literature. It's the uber villain in all of Marxist literature since 1948 on out. It has been savaged. It has been thrown through the mud, but it has endured stoically, bravely, and it went about the business of actually making the world a better place. As a result, we now have more obese people in the world than we have starving. Isn't that something? Wasn't accomplished by Marxism. Nope. But Marxism did do a much better job of signaling its great virtue to whoever wanted to listen. So, I've always disliked a dialectical materialist BS because it applies a lens to history, a lens of power dynamics, oppression, exploitation, the evils of the white man sort of thing. And that, let's just give that its due. It's done its job. It's been able to inflame a whole bunch of people. But as they say, turnaround is fair play. So if Marx can choose to look at the world, apply, create some BS definition of what he sees as the problem, and then take that and apply it historically to all struggle, to all issues, I suggest that we can do the same. Or capitalism can do the same. So without further ado, welcome to the Dialectic of Capitalism. And this one's pretty simple. I won't go through all the verbiage because half of it is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but fundamentally, you can make the legitimate case that any interaction amongst people is a voluntary transaction. And the true beauty, the great song of attracting the voluntary transaction, the great dance of that interplay is what capitalism is. How well you gauge the market, how well you display your skills, how well you pitch your skills, how well you gauge your competitor, how well you're able to position yourself, how well you get society to reward you for your particular unique abilities. Everything's capitalism. You can turn your nose at the concept of free markets, but they exist no matter where you are. You can be oppressed and there's still free markets. You can be enslaved and there's still free markets. You can be in a prison and there's still free markets. That's how you get your cigarettes. There's always some market that is unstoppable. You can oppose them all you want. They cannot be denied. In all walks of life, in all areas, they have always existed and will always exist. No matter what somebody wants to attribute to them as being some sort of offshoot of patriarchy and Western blah, blah, blah. So, if you understand that, then how you position yourself in those marketplaces, if you're a thug in prison, how do you exploit that specific market dynamic? What's your market assessment? What's your penetration plan? What's your roll-up strategy? What's your sales plan? What's your exit plan? Everything. All of a sudden, things like alienation, exploitation, oppression, all of those are just basically cost-benefit analysis. There's nothing emotional in that, right? Or there is, but it also has its value on the balance. So let's do that. Let's look at Marx's little corner of the world with a lens of a traditional person steeped in, say, product marketing as a skill. If you've ever been in corporate America and have run a business line and have had responsibility over a P&L, a profit and loss statement, and you had to gauge what the market wanted, how much money you had to invest in creating your product, creating the need, creating the demand, mapping the risk, all of that stuff completely. And at the end of the day, you basically have to tally up everything and see how you did. You have to think of everything. You can't just simply say, much like Marxism did, here's a problem, here's a problem, here's a problem. I won't provide any solutions. I'm just going to say I want to get rid of the problems. No. capitalism has the beauty of being all-encompassing. In the end, it's all in the final tally. So let's look at good old Marx. So let's start with 1948, because realistically, up till then, let's sort of look at his coming up before he's coming out. He went to school as a well, the intention was to become a lawyer, but he immediately failed at that. So strike one. Went to Berlin, tried to get a thesis through, couldn't do it. Went to Bonn, tried to get a thesis through, couldn't do it. Went to Jena, and yeah, he was able to graduate from the party school. Okay. So now he's left in the cold, cruel marketplace, and his marketable skill set is writer. Not terribly great writer either, because he can't really get a job at the more prestigious locales. He has to settle for sort of the newsletter type rags, the reactionaries, those pesky up and coming communists. So he starts writing reactionary stuff, and wouldn't you know it, he positions it so well that he gets kicked out of his country. So strike two. Didn't engage that market, gone. Now he's off to, I believe he's in Brussels, and he's gotten married. He has been able to gauge some piece of the market correctly. He has always been around the, let's say, chiseled upper class. Amongst his peers, amongst his acquaintances, I should say, they were aristocrats, nobility. He marries a baroness, the daughter of a Westphalian house, who is a little bit more liberal in his thoughts, but very much a blue blood. His family was okay. They had some money. His father dies. He doesn't necessarily jump in to support the family. He just continues to be parasitical and stay in school. But the mother manages, and eventually she kicks the bucket and leaves him a nice little sum. But despite all that, he persists to being in debt. So definitely score high on the consumerism dynamic. Love to have the money, love to spend the money, never quite had enough, which begins to come out. Because in 1948, he finally realizes that he's had a little bit of success here and there. He kind of did a nice dunk on some guy by the name of Proudhon. Got himself a little fan club out of the young Hegelians, so he thinks he's got, maybe the makings of a up-and-coming creator, some fresh young content creator for the market. And so he thinks, okay, well, let me look around. Let me see what the dynamics of this new marketplace are. And he sees that in 1948, literally, except for where he is in Brussels, every other town in all of Europe is on fire with revolutions. People are pissed off. The international deployment of the Industrial Revolution is in its swing, right? In the 1700s, you had a little bit of the introduction of that. But now we're getting to being able to, make huge factories with steam engines and pouring steel and big behemoths, empire buildings kind of thing. So he doesn't know much about it, but like everything, he's a walking Dunning-Kruger effect. He kind of looks at it and thinks he's got it diagnosed, so he thought, let me take a shot. So he writes this little pamphlet, Communist Manifesto. Now that is his product. Fundamentally, if you're a philosopher, your product is whatever the hell your theories are, and you package them up nicely, and hopefully you've hit the right demographic, and you've done your targeting right, and then you get some response. So, right on the tail end of the Cologne Communist Rebellion, he figures, let me slide right in on that extra publicity and just, use that as a launching platform for me. And that's his first product trial. It's sort of the trial balloon. You let it float out there, right? He floats his theory. And what's his theory? What's his product? Well, it's basically he identifies this class called the proletariats. And then he identifies the bad guys, the capitalists. And he doesn't necessarily explain it too much. No need in dwelling in all that economics crap, because that's not differentiating. That's not unique. That's not a special sauce. No, he decides to focus on something called oppression, exploitation, alienation, all of that stuff. Now, the demographic, one would assume, him being one of them fancy writers, intellectuals, would be The goal would have been to secure success by, getting his unique skill set recognized by the existing meritocracy, the existing hierarchy of intellectuals, and securing a place in said hierarchy. Unfortunately, that doesn't turn out. Most of the real intellectuals of the day, they kind of see his spiel for what it is, mostly garbage. It's lacking any economics, any social theory whatsoever, and they say so. Not only that, it's very materialistic. It's obsessed with materialism. For all of his talk about the little guy and the proletariat, I mean, it's materialism. I mean, it's all about the dollar, all about the Benjamins. He's obviously telegraphing. It's kind of a blinding glimpse of the obvious. They see his theory as basically thinly veiled cravings for power and material wealth. I mean, cravings, unmet cravings, unsatisfied cravings, frustrated aspirations of the inept or the maladroit. That whining voice, the impotent and ineffectual vocalizing of the ressentiment, right? See me, notice me, I'm an intellectual, I'm a deep thinker, trust me, look at my ideas. Except that, obviously, they see right through it. And of course, to get into said hierarchy, I mean, to merit securing a good position, a power position in the existing intellectual hierarchy, you need to have, well, merit. Now, without sufficient skill or sufficient talent or, connection or something, some leverage, you're screwed. So now, this is where I'll give him some credit. Part of him, he realizes that he will never get there on that path. He realizes he ain't got it. Some part of him. Not necessarily the part he chooses to externalize, but some part of him. And to his credit, he doesn't engage in the traditional ressentiment behavior, which is try to find somebody in that hierarchy and stab him in the back and take a spot. No. He's got plans. Because now he's got that sort of indignation of the weak. He's going to create a plan. He needs an alternative. And of course, what do you do when the hierarchy you're looking to penetrate is full? Well, you look for another hierarchy, a specialty hierarchy that allows you to differentiate your skill set. And hopefully one exists because, thank God for capitalism, it allows the creation of those things. So he's got this thing, this plan. He needs something. He knows he needs something because the response he got, he didn't get any response from his target demographic on his product, but he did get some response. He got some response from sort of the raven quasi-intellectuals, the ones that thought they could see something in that writing and it resonated with them, the vain, the narcissist, the wannabe intellectual. So there is a little long tail market there. And, given that he's in this industrial age, given that printing now is the day's internet, well, he's going to create the content and he's going to float it out there, but he needs he needs to repackage it, maybe make it a little thicker, maybe a little more, imposing, because obviously a pamphlet ain't going to do it. But he's got to polish that product. And then it dawns on him that, shit, he never got any response from what was the at least overt end client of this theory, the proletariat. Well, of course, I mean, they didn't have any money there. Hell, he doesn't want their support. He wants to claim that he's selling it to them. I mean, the trick is you can't get any rise out of the top guys. You can't, there is no rise to be gotten out of the bottom guys. So how do you go after that sweet, sweet filling in the middle? How do you get yourself to that demographic? But he's too lazy to change the fundamental product. So then it dawns on him. And in many respects, he may be the inventor of the pyramid scheme. Because it dawns on him that a multi-level marketing plan is necessary. He needs a sales channel. He needs a partner channel. He needs to sell through others that'll recruit others and recruit others and recruit others. So he needs a hook. Okay, so he takes his old construct, keeps proletariat, keeps oppression, keeps exploitation, keeps capitalist, and then says, what we need is a new class. It is a new class of intellectual. Because what is the dynamic here? The proletariat, which he now in the partner brochure calls them Lumpenproletariat. You're interested in the German translation, you don't have to go too far. Just think, what are you trying to call someone if you call them a lump? The lump proletariat, they don't have this quality of class consciousness. No. And it is the intellectual, this new class of intellectual, the one that possesses this uber sensitivity, this rarefied air of class consciousness. They need those guys to lead them to the promised land, to the utopia, to heaven. So in effect, right there, he crafts a new specialty hierarchy, and it's genial. I'll give him that. Not only is it new, not only is it a specialty hierarchy, it is the promised land. It is basically the new world, but in the cognitive space, the philosophic space. Because, yes, you, Mr. Thinks you are an intellectual, we want you. Trust me, if you come here, you're part of the new class, the new intellectual, the one that is possessed of class consciousness, and you will get to lead in the future. That's a great pitch. What? You don't know what class consciousness is? Don't worry, we got on-the-job training. Meet Marxism. Here's a book. We're working on it still, but don't worry about it. Memorize a few terms, spit them out at the right time, and most importantly, whenever you hear somebody else spit out the same terms, agree with them and tell them they're intelligent, and they'll do the same to you. And whatever dumb play they try to put out there, support it, and they'll support yours. Because it's a nice internetworking kind of plan, We need stability. We need, solidarity. Yes, that's what we need. Now, basically, you've got a training program for the partner class. You've got a partner pitch. Better yet, you've got leadership roles. You've got career prospects for that entire new class you're going to attract. Now, of course, this is not a immediate sort of thing he does. I mean, this rationalization of what he needs to do happens between 48 and 67. It took a little bit, but what the hell? 19 years ain't that bad. But he has to secure some investors, so he makes himself a nice little friend, Engels. Engels, he has a factory, so he actually met proletariats once in a while. But whenever he gets invited by Engels to visit the factory, he says no, because he doesn't like that whole dirt under his fingernails thing. But he goes to the library a lot because, words are important, and he needs to put more words in there, so he borrows a lot of Hegel's. Because neologism is the new language, because obviously, if you can't trade in the same exact language as the existing dominance hierarchy, you need to have a separate but equal amount of bullshit you can put on the page. So that way, when you're trying to impress the little prole, he can't tell the difference between a theoretical physicist and a theoretical Marxist. He stumbles on that. So with Engels' little cash and his help, and frankly, Engels is a little bit more of a sharp thinker, so he kind of helps him. He first look at the draft of Das Kapital, and Engels goes, well, that's kind of stupid. We might want to change this and that and the other. So it begins to kind of get his shape. And, think of it as the nice new glossy sales brochure of the oppression product. And whammo, it launches. The marketing campaign is on, mother. Launch is 67, 65, I forget. Anyways, it launches. And of course, now, nail-biting time. Do you see, how much adoption do you get? Are people going to respond? But although you can say that he was completely maladroit in economics, in social sciences, didn't meet a mathematical problem he could solve, all of that, you can say all that. He was possessed of some peerless insight. Basically, exploitation of character flaws. If you had some misplaced envy, if you had some vanity, if you had some greed, if you had some dreams, some little the grandiose sort of megalomaniac kind of, pinky-biting world domination plans, but yet you were just this worthless piece of shit that never could get out of bed, all of a sudden, here's this new offer. And it seems to resonate. And if you're a narcissist, if you're a snob, if you're a malcontent, if you're a reactionary, whatever it is, all of the little people that, the bohemian, the person who, let's say maybe was born of money, but, he just was frustrated at the world, not because he failed, because he couldn't see that piece, not because he never actually ran into that cold shower of reality to say, hey, you've got to put your shoulder up to some load before you actually can get any benefit, and guess what? It's going to take a while. No. Because life didn't just happen, and because daddy was so mean right before he would write the monthly check, there was a lot of these guys that basically resonated, and it resonated. So when his little Das Kapital pitch went out, it was a goddamn siren song. It was a religion for the new age. They came in droves. Any frustrated creative type, anybody who never had that come to Jesus meeting with reality, everybody that could still live and basically lie to themselves and feed themselves a bullshit story, all of a sudden had a ticket of doing that forever. They could stay Peter Pan. You know, none of that stop whining and get to work kind of advice. No, 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 no. None of that, let's listen to Pater because Pater knows what he's doing and he's got some business. No, 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 no. You can be a rebel. You can be a revolutionary. Opportunity calls. And this Marx guy, man, he gets me. He gets me. So he gets a lot of takers. Some of them come with such fervor, they're almost like zealots or disciples. It's a religion. And, you know, like a good head of a religion, he provides prophecies. He provides prophecies about the imminent collapse of capitalism under the weight of its evils. The brave and noble proletariat class rising up to break the chains of tyrannical oppression. It's like, you know, Armageddon stuff. So these ideas get him more converts. Now, albeit, you have to understand, it's mostly new class converts, not lumpen proletariat, because, you know, those guys can't afford the price of entry. And yeah, maybe some of them kind of stumble into this little socialist gathering or another, but he's very critical of them because they don't have an academic theory from which to base their actions. Literally, I'm quoting him. Well, so his zealots are, you know, around the guru, and they're patiently waiting for Armageddon to come. Maybe some of them are checking their watches, but, you know, goes he. And then 1883 comes around and he kicks the bucket. And the prophecies didn't come. It reminds you of certain religions around that same time? Yeah. Well, now, some of the more, let's say, bright sparks amongst his flock. Say, this guy by the name of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Some of them hoity-toity types in London. That guy by the name of Gramsci. Some weird guy with a funky mustache in Germany. They all basically kind of get into their heads that, you know what? We've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this Armageddon, and that ain't gonna do it. So we're not going to talk blasphemy. We're not against the Marxist word. We're not against canon, but we need to vulgate. We need to refine the church doctrine. And we need to sort of take a little spin and see how we can basically get a little bit more out of it. Get it a little bit more to whatever each locale needs. So they do that. Now you've got, in the UK, they're basically a little bit more, well, let's just say, and I'm maybe doing this a little bit not out of sequence, but you'll see in a minute. Because while the UK people are firming up their thoughts, the Russia people are doing theirs. So we'll start with UK and then we'll move to Russia. But in the UK, they recognize that direct confrontation, that's not smart, because for a while now, the prime minister and both the monarchy and the constitutional government, they don't like Bolshevism and communism, whatever you want to call those. The reactionary thing, they don't like that. They like king and queen and country and all that shit. So they're stomping on it hard. And these guys don't have it bad. I mean, they're intellectuals. They're sitting at cafes. They've got, they're in King's College. They're in London School of Economics. I mean, they got a good life. They're not going to fuck that up. So they have to refine their tactics. They're not about to overthrow. They're going to influence. So they dig through their eclectic liberal arts education and find that in Rome, when Rome faced its most trying of challenges, namely Hannibal, and upon the first clash destroyed its many numerous armies, and all of a sudden was left in the unenviable position of being Rome, but with an inferior army, against Hannibal with elephants and a shitload more people and a whole bunch of added Gauls who really hated Rome. all of a sudden they were beginning to shit bricks because what the hell are they going to do against Hannibal? And out came the man, Quintus Fabius Maximus, later on named Cunctator, the delayer, because he stumbled on the brilliant idea of, hey, I can't fight these guys, but maybe I can just harass them till I make them go home. And that's what he did. He just kept harassing and harassing and harassing, never engaging them in a square battle, frustrating Hannibal continuously, redirecting him, misdirecting him, all of that stuff. So call it the ancient Roman art of asymmetric warfare before it had been coined. But wouldn't you know it, it worked. And eventually he's able to break up Hannibal's army, and Hannibal tries to run away, but eventually they catch up to him and they stick a sword in his upper torso and he's done. And Quintus Fabius becomes Fabius Cunctator. So this group of people, and you might recognize some names, Bernard Shaw, Bertrand Russell, Sidney Webb, Lasky, Pease, Wallace, a bunch of people. They decide to form this thing that they call the Fabian Society. And they, like Fabian, or Fabius, they will infiltrate and slowly continue to apply pressure, but just not enough pressure to, not even as vulgar as Fabius. No. They're going to be kind of like the mosquito on the elephant. They're just going to move things a little bit at a time, back off as soon as there's any sort of reaction, right? And not only are they going to do it in the UK, they're going to do it in the States too. So one of their first emblems, as you see here, was a wolf dressed with some sheep's skin. Now, obviously, before moving to the States, they thought, gee, gosh, that may be too on the nose. But we'll change that to just this nondescript square that says Fabian Society on it. Okay. Now, since 1888, they've been going back and forth to Harvard because, Harvard's, Harvard. And because they were of renown, Russell, Shaw, all those that big name, they got to teach here and there, do a little class here, a little class there. So they were very accepted. And the problem with the States, those pesky founders, is that they had these 10 commandments in their religion, free speech and shit like that. So you could actually be a crazy-ass communist, and it wasn't against the law. You could be a socialist, you could be a Marxist, you could be whatever. And especially if you went to Harvard, because Harvard, well, they were in that rarefied air. They maintained those goddamn principles. They weren't going to kick you out. So they went and established themselves a little foothold there. W.E.B. Du Bois, Mr. Ward, Mr. Robinson, a bunch of people. And the plan was simple. We're going to penetrate education. And we're going to teach students, because that's what you do in Harvard. And then they graduate. And now they've been taught, because thank God for malleable minds, who's going to expect that the professor at the most prestigious goddamn school in the fucking world is taking your hard-earned money, and instead of fulfilling that most noble and sacrosanct of traditions of being able to expose you fairly to all open points of view, who would have thought that they would actually attempt to fucking brainwash you, right? Now, well, they do. So one by one, you start getting these sort of pro-socialist, pro-Marxist, pro-communist even graduates, and they're graduates of Harvard. They've got the keys to the kingdom. You got Mr. Frankfurter, Mr. Lippmann, Mr. Reed, Mr. Harry Dexter White, Mr. Schumpeter, Mr. Sweezy. Sorry, not Sneezy. That's one of the 7 dwarfs. Richard Baldwin. You got a bunch of people. And all these guys, one that heads up the ACLU, becomes an advisor to FDR, becomes a SCOTUS, becomes the head of the NAACP. Many of them become journalists, writers, artists. They're personalities on the radio, on the TV. At a minimum, they get in, once FDR has to do that little, New Deal thing, when you start getting the WPA, the work association, where they start putting all these like artists to work and basically trying to create free jobs, most of the money was being run by socialists. That's why, Marxists will wet themselves when they talk about the FDR period, about the revival of culture in America. I don't know. Look at the aesthetic of, before socialism and post. I don't know. You tell me. But let's say it was good. And a bunch of them come out. I mean, Alger Hiss was, eventually he ended up being convicted as a spy, but originally he was the one that wrote part of the charter for the UN. So, he got to play. Harry Dexter White was basically, along with John Maynard Keynes, was basically a economic advice for Bretton Woods. So, you're beginning to see a little chunk of history, and you're beginning to see sort of these little pink fingerprints everywhere. But hey, no problem. We're a big country. We can take it. We got capitalism. Now, back in the Rodina, back in Mother Russia, good old Lenin, I mean, he's hanging around, he'd been hanging around Marx, and, he had enough. He was going to go try some shit. Because to him, he would tell people that, I'm a professional revolutionary, meaning he doesn't have time for all this theorist bullshit. Leave that to Trotsky. Fuck this theory. He needs some action. He's going to get some rebellion going. He's going to get his. So he tries. And fails spectacularly in 1905. The first Bolshevik Revolution didn't quite go. Throw a party, nobody came. And he goes to jail. But that's good. Much like it happened with Hitler, this allowed him that critical time to collect his thoughts, to get focused. And all of a sudden, again, blinding glimpse of the obvious, he gets the idea that, hey, subversion seems to be a pretty good tactic. Because all of a sudden, you can just destabilize the country's conditions, get people to, argue with one another continuously, and shit goes sideways pretty quick. And then all of a sudden, you're not fighting the regime's fighting the regime. And all you got to do is wait. So whatever you didn't have the first time in terms of military prowess, well, you can compensate for that by just pushing destabilization a little further. In fact, his gauge, because, he wants to be precise, he goes, the worse, the better. That's his advice. The worse, the better. That's referring to his own country in terms of how badly did you screw up the situation in your own native place to your compadres, so that way they would be more inclined to come to your way of thinking, which is what he proceeds to do. And in 1917, wham bam, thank you ma'am, he's got a country. And he is heralded as the visionary. I mean, he's got, his own publications of many, many, wisdom teachings. Like his big one, learn, learn, learn. That's the 3 keys to success. That took a while. So after you basically blow up the country, make everybody starve and everybody hate each other, then, you show up and you say, hey, I'm the new boss again. Then there's a little bit of a normalization period. Normalization means you take all of the people that kind of helped you blow shit up and you very kind of quietly make them go away. Because who needs radicals now? Because now you need quiet. And then you wait for the next generation of the smart kids to figure out which ones are smart enough to run the place, but not smart enough to think that they're smarter than you. The ones that think that they're smarter than you, they go to reconditioning too. Reconditioning would be sort of a re-education camp. It's, the hammer and the sickle? The hammer is the economic policy, right? Everything that's a problem, it looks like a nail, it's a hammer. Boom. The sickle is the re-education. You just kind of collect them in the night. Okay. So, now, again, he didn't style himself the theoreticist. Trotsky was that. And then Trotsky, he was a theoreticist. And fundamentally, he didn't really like the methods that Lenin undertook. And then, he was he had a little bit of, humanity. And had expressed some shortcomings to, some doubt in the way he made the country suffer, and all that shit starts coming out in the news. It doesn't come out look at him, he was such a caring man. No. Look at him as he's a fucking traitor to our cause. And all of a sudden, he's got to hightail it out of there and exile his ass to France. Otherwise, he's going to get killed because Lenin kicks the bucket. And now, who's left in charge? That third rung, the thugs. Because, when you get rid of the reactionaries, and then you're trying to keep in line those little smarty pants, you get yourself a couple of country thugs. And the country thugs keep everybody in line. And Stalin was one of them. He was a country thug, and he knew how to basically bash some heads. Now he was in charge. He bashed some heads. Now, if you lived in said country, I happen to have been raised in one of these countries, not the first generation Rodina, but the sort of disciples of the disciples. So it's not Muhammad, it's not his immediate successor, but it's out there, like the ones who start, I don't know, Sufism or something. Ceausescu was my dear leader, and I remember going to a bookstore and seeing basically, like, in a place of honor, a big shelf of his innumerable works of wisdom, his philosophy. Now, you could look at them and basically read them and discuss them in intellectual circles of communism intelligentsia. Or you could actually take a little bit more of a pragmatic sort of approach and go, funny, because as far as I remember, this guy never actually made it past 4th grade. He was basically a cobbler, and then he kind of became a thug, and then he was head of government. So when did he write all this shit? And he wrote copious amounts. Because you see, when you get to power, that second rung of the smart kids, the ones where you have to triage and say, okay, if you're too smart, you're going to Siberia. But if you're just smart enough and you know how to salute just well, and if you know how to do the Heil Hitler or the Heil Comrade just vehemently enough that I believe you, then you can stay. But we got to keep you engaged. So you're going to write. So you're going to write you're going to be my new pen name. And you're going to write me my memoirs. You're going to write me my insights. You're going to write me my wisdom to impart to the people as favored son of the country that I am. So from Stalin, you get a whole new line of people that just do wonders for their respective countries. You got Mao. Mao did real well. Mao took that communism thing and really applied it on a wide scale. Anybody that even remotely got contaminated with any sort of Western thinking, you played the piano too well, you played a lot of Western pieces, chop your hands off. That'll teach you. Wore glasses, shoot them. The Cultural Revolution, it was called. And it cleaned up quite a bit. So one of the main problems China had at the time, much like Russia, it was a big country, lots of people, not enough wheat. And how are you going to feed all them hungry mouths? Well, you shoot about 20 million of them, and then all of a sudden you don't have as many to feed. And then he did this beautiful thing about the whole one-child policy. That eventually comes to bite you, because now China's going to kind of go belly up because of that. But we'll talk about that in some other video. And then, of course, you got like Pol Pot and Ho Chi Minh. And, in recent times, you got Mr. Hugo Chavez. And you got Castro. And you got, well, to a lesser extent, you got Gaddafi. Gaddafi was more Islamic than, but he definitely took some of the management tactics of socialism, but the rest of them were socialist. Even good old Saddam, the Ba'ath Party, was basically another Marxist-Leninist varietal. And you got Mr. Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and Kim. Well, the Kim Il-sung is the granddaddy. Granddaddy took over and then tried to take on Southern Korea. America jumped in. He had to settle, blah, blah, blah. And he started seeing the change. And then at some point, he actually had a little bit of a change of heart. But it happened at the wrong time, and the generals didn't like it, so he got in the shower and slipped on some bullets and died. Mugabe did well. Zimbabwe has one of those amazing world records that their currency has reached the absolute highest level of inflation. They had $1 trillion bills pass around. $1 trillion bills. $1 trillion. Imagine that. $1 trillion bills in your wallet. They didn't buy much. They were kind of like $1 bills or less. But $1 trillion bills. Now, I jump ahead, but let's just go back. Because Lenin does his little Bolshevism thing, and then, well, as he's doing that, as he's preparing to as he's licking his wounds from the first battle that he lost and getting prepared for the second one, World War I breaks out. And that's his opportunity because, the Russians kind of get involved. They get all these weapons laying around. Now he's got a whole bunch of people that are upset. They got guns. And he starts destabilizing what is already a destabilized country. And, of course, the Canadians send some people and the Americans send some people. They end up fucking up everything. So he's got a beautiful opportunity, and bam, he's got a country. Now, this guy with the mustache in Germany, he's looking, okay, well, I get what Lenin did. What the fuck do I do? He kind of looks across the other countries. Now, in this other boot country, this guy Gramsci kind of looked at the theory of Marx and said, I'm not really feeling this whole class thing, really. mean, it didn't really work out for the Russians real good because, they weren't that industrial. So if you're not that industrialized, you ain't got a lot of proles. You ain't got a lot of proletariat. You got a lot of farmers, a whole different class. So they just kind of ignored that and went and just rounded up everybody. And then this World War I thing happened. And look, these class fuckers from Italy were fighting these other same class fuckers from France. And they were beating each other up no problem. So class ain't shit. I don't know what Marx was thinking, but maybe I need something else. I'm going to say nationalism. I'm going to say French are French, and Italians are Italians, goddammit. We're Romans. We go back. We're centurions. In fact, actually, what was that symbol that they did, the praetors, when they came into Rome? What did that stick with the axe? What was that called? Fascia. Fascia. Oh, that's what we're going to be. We're going to be fascists. So Mustache Man sits on his side, and he goes, good idea. I like this concept of, like, the nation. Yeah, ein Volk. Ein Volk, yeah, one people. Yeah, we got a lot of different people. Huh. Well, I don't know. You need somebody to oppress because you're going to take shit from somebody, and who am I going to take it from? But let me look across the pond at my friends, the Americans. Starts looking at that history. Stumbles on Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, his little trail of tears, and he realizes, hey, I got a perfectly working indigenous population. Right? I got Slavs. I got Jews. I got all these guys that came in from Russia. Because little thing that doesn't quite get as reported. See, the Jews that once were in Russia, right before Hitler decided to start executing them, not right before, but let's say 50 to 100 years before, there was a shitload of pogroms in Russia, and they got pushed out, and they ended up in Frankfurt and Berlin and all these places, and, being historically sort of the down and out people. You notice the little picture here? The red cap? You might be familiar with the character. It was very aptly described by Mr. Shakespeare. Shylock. Shylock, the merchant of Venice. Jews were never allowed to hold certain positions. So if you were a Jew and you happened to live in Europe, you were kind of screwed. You couldn't have this, you couldn't have that, you couldn't hold that position. So what was left to you was basically a whole bunch of unsavory shit or money lending. So that kind of sharpened their abilities to deal with money. But because, Europeans were so damn civilized, they needed to be marked to stand out. That's why they wore the red caps. So Hitler doing the little star thing, he wasn't creative. He just got it out of history. Hitler oppressing them and oppressing the Slavs and the Gypsies and all them others, he didn't get that either. That wasn't original. That was Andrew Jackson's thing. And then that whole racial purity thing that he started kind of getting all weirdo about by the end, he didn't come up with that either. That was Elizabeth Sanger. Go figure. Remember Elizabeth Sanger? I mean, look at this. The governor's trophy for fittest family. Where do you think that little contest took place? Think it was Germany? Nah. You think it was during Mr. Mustache's time? No, it was before his time. It was in the good old US of A because, we wanted to manage our genes. We don't talk about that. Democrats don't like to talk about that shit now. They did that. That's where he got his ideas. So, yeah, he was a fucking evil bastard. He did all sorts of atrocious shit, but he was a goddamn socialist. No matter what you hear this whole, he was right-wing. Bullshit. Wasn't right-wing. He didn't conserve shit. He wanted government to run everything, and they did. He allowed a little bit of capitalism to still survive while he allowed it, but government said, you're going to work, you're going to work, you're going to work, you're going to work. And they even told which women, they told a whole bunch of women, you're going to have to fuck to make more blue-eyed children. Now that don't sound like laissez-faire capitalism to me. So that ain't right-wing. So sorry. Don't care who wants to position what. It's fucking socialism, communism. That's why they called it, National Socialism. So when Gramsci came up with fascism, Germans aren't as creative with the names. So they just called it like it was. They just they did the literal name. No, Nationales, Socialista, something like National Socialist Worker Party, and you got them long German Gestunge words. So obviously everybody eventually just shortened it and just did the whole 2-syllable thing, Nazi. And, everybody knew what they were talking about. That's how you get them. So let's just not worry about that whole thing. I mean, okay, granted, all these people that inherited a little bit of Marx, they killed, 60 million with the mustache guy, say another, I don't know, 20, 25 to round it out with the other bigger mustache guy. Then you got the little guy with the funny haircut and the thing about cultural revolution. He kills about another 20. Well, he killed 20 mil before, and then he 20 mil after. So I don't know how you want to count that one. Pol Pot only managed like a couple of mil. Ho Chi Minh didn't really do that much because, you know, Vietnam's not that big of a country. Chavez didn't kill that many during his time. He just killed the country, and now they're all dying. Let's see. Mugabe, well, you know, Mugabe just broke. Zimbabwe wasn't that big anyway, so he couldn't get to kill that much. Who else? Ceausescu, well, I was there. He didn't kill that many. There wasn't that many to kill. He definitely, like, tortured a shitload, but he didn't kill that many. He sold them. Actually, that was a beautiful thing. Talk about the enlightenment of socialism. You think Hitler was bad with Jews? Ceausescu would sell Jews to Israel. He didn't allow anybody to leave. He made such a barrier to the process of immigration that Jews that tried to leave Romania because they had it, trying to go to Israel, they could, if they managed to convince their Israeli, you know, destination government to send 40K payable in, you know, small unmarked bills to Mr. Ceausescu. Yeah, that was another beautiful little foreign policy he had. In any case, then you got like the Korean people. He killed just Kim Il-sung, the first one. He killed 2 million people out of 20 million. Now that's trying. That's really working because that's basically Roman times, you know, decimation. When you hear decimated, well, whenever the army would misbehave, 1 out of 10 people off with their heads. 1 out of 10. What he did. 20 million, killed 2 million. But he did it with starvation, but hey. So yeah, you know, they've kind of, they've left their mark. Marxism works. In the meantime, capitalism is like hard at work, even though it's getting basically pelted with all this bullshit out of socialists, because you got socialists now all over Harvard, coming out in Yale, going to Berkeley, going to all these places. And then you've got, you see, right about the time when socialism was sort of creating all these disciples, I forgot one. Back in the day, another one. There was the London School of Economics, and there was the Frankfurt School. Now, the Frankfurt School was thriving in Frankfurt, and then the little mustache guy came around, and even though they were sort of a birds of a feather, they were like, this motherfucker insane, we gotta get the fuck out of here. So in 1935, as soon as it looked like, you know, this shit was gonna go sideways, they booked it to America. And they kind of sat, you know, they sat chill on the DL. They didn't do much. I mean, Adorno and Horkheimer maybe published a few books, but they didn't make a fuss because the problem was there was all these wars going on. World War I, World War II. There was this McCarthyism thing. Then there was this, like, House Un-American activities and all this shit. So they weren't going to stick their head up too high. They let the Harvard and Yale people do that. Some of them got caught. Some of them made the news. But then eventually, you know, a nice little, you know, a nice humiliation campaign happened. They got McCarthy to basically make his name synonymous with you know, scumbag. All because he basically said, hey, we got a bunch of communists working in our State Department. Maybe we ought not to do that. But in any case, now come the 50s and the 60s. Now they feel, okay, now we're going to come out with our wisdom. And shit, fuck, motherfucker, if they didn't. Critical theory, I did another video on that. Feel free to, that's another long rant. But critical theory, oh my God, if that's not the best goddamn synthesis of the most lethal virus that the world has ever fucking seen. But one, Adorno comes with this Minima Moralia, Reflections from a Broken Land. You got, and they're not saying that they're not Marxist. You know, they're flat out, you know, Marxism, revolution, and utopia. You know, they're flat out there. You got Marcuse is he wrote his ass off. Eros and Civilization, basically how to take a generation and make them fuck a lot. Because by convincing them that that's the way you're going to self-actualize your higher self and all that shit. Use a lot of words kind of thing. So now you've got, on one hand, you got all these like 50s crew, you know, clean cut, crew cut kind of boys that have to march their ass out to Vietnam because the government says so. Or you got long-haired, hippie-dippy, whatever, getting into vans and getting stoned. And all of a sudden, you got a little clash of culture. Of course, if you say cultural Marxism, a whole slew of Marxists will just jump up and say, what cultural Marxism? There's no Marxism here. Amazing how basically every time you hear a Marxist speak, they act like they've never seen another Marxist in their life. But every fucking professor in most liberal arts is proud to display his Marxism credentials on his little tag. Um, but, of course, that all of these ideas, they came from, same places. You got the same, you got Miss Sanger. Planned Parenthood takes off because guess what? The pill comes out and wham bam, the sex revolution comes out. You've got a new influence because, see, when Hitler had France, he was actually kind of polite about it. He kind of kicked their ass real quick. They gave up real quick, so he didn't kill too many of them. So he put them to work. But the soldiers were instructed to be polite, to not fuck people up too bad. I mean, to the degree that they didn't. And these intellectual writers, like Sartre, recalls in his memoirs that he was frustrated because they were too fucking polite. And it just was surreal to be there in an occupied country, So as he stewed, this is where you begin to see that whole ressentiment process build up, and just sort of spill over. Then he starts writing a whole bunch of shit. Strangely enough, and this is maybe just my observation, because I don't mean to imply, but it seems like all the motherfucking postmodern philosophers, all the luminaries of France, were sexually fucked in the head. Because, you start with Sartre. Sartre kind of had, like, one eye, he had strabism, right? One eye was, like, crooked. Not the most attractive guy. Kind of looked froggy. But he was a very intelligent, existentialist, looking at the, well, this is a concept that's really unique to France, the vedette philosopher, the star intellectual. And he was able to command a certain amount of pussy, one of which was Simone de Beauvoir, who he didn't really want to marry because he liked that whole, like, triangular thing. Narcissists, if you ever read up on narcissists, read about setting up triangular relationships. They're big on that. Group narcissists really get off on that. So Simone de Beauvoir, who had gone to school with him, was, let's say, his intellectual equal. But Monsieur Sartre had already written, big, amazing, sort of insightful philosophies like man makes himself. And it's really most of society is really just a construct, an abstraction, and you can build it. She had to basically write about something. And she really was into him. And whenever, like, the concept of marriage would come around, he's like, yeah, I'll sign the lease. Such a romantic way to put it. Basically, he didn't buy into the whole Holy Union thing. And, of course, coming from a family of the age, most of her, quote-unquote normative, translation normal, relatives would be like, hey, hon, when are you getting married? How's that little Sartre boy? You guys getting along? You're going to have some kids. You're going to get married, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, it was frustrating because that wasn't going to happen, and she wasn't going to say anything. So she would just rail and say, God damn it, why does the world always have to tell me how to be a woman? Why can't a woman be independent? Why can't a woman do all this stuff? And, if you look at it, it's fundamentally a legitimate set of bitching, right? The world was getting on her case, and she was frustrated. So she writes about that, the second sex. And it really isn't, at least through the eyes of today, you look at it and you go, yeah, she had a point. Of course, that later on gets into a whole new slew of ideas, which is all of a sudden gender is a construct. It's abstract. Kind of like the world is a construct. Technically it is. It's a construct. It's in your cognitive matrix. It's also out there in the real world, but it's also a construct. So you start getting all these things, and the reason I said they're all sort of sexually deviant, and I don't mean they're gay or something like that, even though that was considered deviant back in those days. No, I'm talking about deviant. Because in about the late 60s, in like 1969, 68, I forget, there's like a petition in France about a whole bunch of like these ages, 40s and 50s, and them people, philosophers, writers, luminaries, write a petition about lowering the age of consent and giving various examples of, like, 11-year-old kids and, one example of 6-year-old kid. How it's really, we've come a long way in our morality. Why must we insist on that whole consentment age thing? Thank God that they had enough conservatism left in the world, in their government, to say, fuck you and the horse you rode in on, right? So they went and tried that shit in the States, too, later. But we'll talk about that. So what do we get? We get Kristeva. Kristeva was a Bulgarian intellectual. Well, fundamentally, she was a spy, actually. She denies it, but then, it turns out that whole, like, Iron Curtain dropped, and then all of a sudden, the secret documents of the, I forget what the Bulgarian Stasi is called, but their security, their KGB, made some of their files public, and sure as fuck, they were getting information from Miss Kristeva, which, thankfully for a supportive media that basically always reports favorably to the left, they just kind of marginalized the whole thing and said, no, that didn't really happen. But yeah, she was totally basically a Bulgarian, not a Russian spy. See, in Russia, they had sort of a hierarchy of specialty espionage. Bulgarians were usually the wet work people. They'd go kill. They weren't very subtle at like industrial infiltration, all that shit. Ceausescu, my country, had a brilliant, leave it to the shoe boy. His view was, we're a poor country. We can't afford diplomats and spies. So all of our diplomats will be spies. So every fucking diplomat we ever put out in the world had also a night job. So as a result, you might imagine, Romania, little Romania, barely developing Romania, all of a sudden was the first in the communist bloc to develop integrated circuits. Why? Because, several months prior, they had like a visit, an official state visit to Texas Instruments, and where they showed them on the factory floor, and all of these like diplomats took very avid notes of everything. They didn't think that strange. All of a sudden, you start stamping out that. They go to De Beers in South Africa not De Beers, sorry, someplace in England. GE, I believe the English subsidiary of GE stumbles on this pressure treatment process where they can create artificial diamonds. And of course, De Beers immediately goes, we'll pay you. Don't do that because it's going to fuck up my little side business in South Africa over here. But Romania comes on a diplomatic visit. And, a few months later, about a year later, they have this little enterprise where all of a sudden they're just cranking out diamonds. And in the West, they start seeing all these perfect fucking diamonds show up. Almost fucking flawless, and they don't know where's this flood in the market coming from. And of course, Ceausescu's wife, another beauty, would always expect that out of each batch, they would collect a few, she called them stars, a few sclipitoare, I forget what the word would be. A few shinies out of each batch. And she had a jar, and she would just collect them. Imagine that. You got all these diamonds, right? They were artificial, but they were diamonds. And you had a jar, and you just filled it up. Now, never got to enjoy them. She got shot, so more power. But in any case, this kind of thing. So you had like Bulgarians going in and shooting people, or if you remember the first guy that died, the big story with the umbrella and the ricin pill, Bulgarian, poked him with the tip of an umbrella, poisoned him. That guy looked like he had a heart attack in the middle of London. I think Trotsky almost got creamed by a Bulgarian, but he refused the mission at the last minute. And there was all this shenanigans back in the day. In the meantime, of course, the American culture starts to get under assault. Now, the attentive amongst you might notice this little insert here. This is not socialism. Dianetics. Dianetics is good old insane L. Ron Hubbard. But if you think about it, when you've got the culture industry, you got the freaking Frankfurt School, the critical theory, the Marxist utopia, the minima moralia, the negative dialectics, the philosophy of inquiry of eros and civilization, does Dianetics really stand out? I mean, who is the more crazy religion? Socialism, Marxism, freaking post-structural, deny every piece of realityism, or fucking Dianetics that says, drink some olive oil and get clear. I mean, frankly, that's fucking sanity when compared to the rest. All right. Well, bitched enough about the hippies. What's next? Well, let's talk about sex. No, not sex, but gender. You might be familiar. Well, you actually won't be, because this has been sort of kept so fucking mixed and matched, so goddamn marginalized, even though it came out. Hardly anybody knows about it, but let's talk about it. The famous John Joan study. That really sickens me when I hear that, because, if you heard that debate between... damn, why am I blanking on his name? Whatever. Some debate. When he referred to the famous John Joan study about sexuality and sort of the relative differences between men and women. It was bullshit. And hands down, almost all of gender as an abstract theory, almost all of the medical shit that was launched in the late 60s, early 70s, thank God by the late 70s it closed, was based on this motherfucker, Mr. John Money. Mr. John Money was, I forget if it was an Aussie or a Aussie. One of them two. Either Zealand or Australia, one of them two. But he comes over, and he wrote his paper on hermaphrodites. There was this concept, the intersex people, where they have a little bit of both, and he wrote his dissertation on it. Now, mind you, there ain't been no goddamn experiments. There ain't been no goddamn study. There ain't been no goddamn book of work out there, right? He's literally theorizing. Money theorized that basically gender was an abstract thing. Gender role and orientation, it's really established by behavior. It was just his idea. Never proved it. Never researched it. Just had a conviction about it. Talk about fucking not showing your work, right? And he comes out to the States and he publishes this, he's getting a little bit of, recognition, and he's being interviewed because, he's talking about this weird thing, hermaphrodite, sex, gender. He's talking about, sex, even though he's talking about like a weird fucking view of it. He's getting on the news. Well, about that time, 1966, Mr. and Mrs. Reimer are having twins, Brian and Bruce. And in Winnipeg, which is where they're having them, the tradition is to cut that skin, to circumcise. And unfortunately, you're supposed to do it with a scalpel, not use, I think, electrosuture, which basically is kind of like a electrically heated thing to kind of electrocauterization, sorry. And the doctor fucks up and uses that and basically burns one of the kids' dicks off. Not exaggerating, burns it off. Destroys his dick. So obviously, problem. But they saw this guy on TV. So basically, parents, being concerned, go in a hurry and find this guy. And he goes, no problem. I got it. We can actually reconstruct, because he's done that in some cases for hermaphroditic intersex patients. We can construct a vagina out of what's, there. And we'll raise one as a girl and we'll raise one as a boy. And he doesn't tell them that whole gender thing he's basically speaking so firmly on, so authoritatively. That's just his supposition. No, he doesn't say that. He says it like it's science. And, the mom and dad do what they hear from the doctor because, he's a doctor. And they do that. And like 20 months later, so in like 68, they basically cut whatever's left and, craft a vagina. And she becomes Brenda Reimer. And the kid, even at, like, right after that, shortly after the operation, and then, like, at age 3, age 4, she's ripping off dresses off of her, and she's crying. She cannot stand these motherfucking dresses, right? She doesn't want them. So it's not her. And they keep telling her she's a girl. And, of course, for this, Mr. Money says, they need to basically have supervision therapy. So they have to bring him in every Saturday or whatever, to have Mr. Money examine them, right? And he dutifully keeps track of the study, and he publishes the Joan and John study. And it convinces the world that, yes, you can raise a boy as a girl. Except that all the shit he put down was bullshit. And the shit he did was basically child abuse. Pedophilia. He would make them pose in various positions. He would basically make them, like straddle each other doggy style, touch his butt, do the, to get them acclimatized to the sex position, because she as a girl needs to be familiar with said positions. I mean, how sick is this shit, right? Basically, this is what, he explained gender role as like all those things that a person says or does to disclose himself or herself as having the status of a boy or a man, a girl or a woman, respectively. It includes, but not restricted to, sexuality in the sense of eroticism. Gender role is appraised in relation to the following: the general mannerisms, the deportment and demeanor, the play preference and the recreational interest, the spontaneous topics of talk in unprompted conversation, casual comments, content of dreams, daydreams and fantasies, replies to oblique inquiries, projective tests, evidence of erotic practices, and finally, the person's own replies to direct inquiry. Now, this is a very fucking comprehensive list. You could invalidate this. You could say, well, yeah, bullshit. You know, maybe the person is just feminine. Maybe he's just gay. But on the flip side, bear in mind that the little kids he was abusing gave no fucking sign of that. The girl didn't see herself as a girl. She was stubbornly a boy. She would come home and she would get dolls and she would wait for the parents to not look and go to her brother. Her brother would feel bad and like give her his trucks and his soldiers to play with. And the girl didn't do well. Obviously, the abuse for money didn't help. And by the time she's basically 13, she's suicidal. Now, that's one of the main issues with trans folks, the ones that basically have this. There used to be a condition in the DSM called dysphoria. They basically develop. I mean, you can imagine if you believe you were born wrong, you're not going to care for the world. So the suicidality is huge. It's like 40%. And it doesn't get better if you actually have sex reassignment surgery. But of course, he uses this little fabricated experiment as a way to justify it. And at Johns Hopkins, they start a nice brisk little trade of chopping off dicks and making them into vaginas. Still, thank God Johns Hopkins closes the thing in 79 because they had enough. They weren't convinced. They weren't convinced that the results were worth it. Because it didn't fix suicidality. It didn't fix anything. It just basically created people that were already confused and made them really fucking confused. So he kept going on. He was advocating the nurture and the nature versus nurture argument. He was creating the word gender and making it something fluid and controllable. He was, here's his successes. He was able to change the term sexual perversion to sexual paraphilias. Now, that sounds nice, doesn't it? Change sexual preference to sexual orientation. You know, it's kind of like a compass. He did try some other shit. He said, well, there's really two kinds of pedophilia. One based on love and another one on harm. He suggested the name fuckology for the scientific study of sex. Now, that one's a rich one. He published Gay, Straight, and In Between, the Sexology of Erotic Orientation. So, you know, it served a nice full generation of fucking people's heads over. And just take this and mull over it. As I was saying about the French postmodernists trying to get the consent age, they tried that too in the States, and here too it got fucked. It got shot down. But he would go to various conferences because he was in this sex trade, and he would always argue on behalf of the paraphilia that was pedophilia. He tried to get it first renamed to chronophilia. Chronophilia is basically, chronophilia would be those of us that are somehow attracted to a very specific narrow range of time in the other person. Okay. Basically pedophilia, and then he tried to split that up into, there's a good kind of pedophilia, affectionate pedophilia, and the sadistic pedophilia. Money asserted that affectional pedophilia was about love, not sex. Here's his words. If I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted towards a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call that pathological in any way. Really? Now, mind you, he when he came here, Mr. Money, he got married and then divorced like a year later, never got married again. One might think that maybe his sexual predilections were a little bit off. I don't know. Not trying to accuse, just trying to think maybe he was a little bit, a child fucker. So yeah, he held this view of affectional pedophilia that it's caused by, get this, a surplus of parental love that becomes erotic. So not only is he stuck on the whole fucking children thing, now he's got to get him hooked up with parents. And it's not a behavioral disorder, no. Rather, he took the position that heterosexuality is yet another example of a societal and therefore superficial ideological concept. So this is who you have to thank for insane shit coming on TV right now. Because although there is some truth to the concept of, yes, gender is a abstract concept, because it is. That's the way you store it in your head. So you can't fit the reality in your head. You fit the abstract. The world is also an abstract concept. So is your cup. So is your, car. So is your freaking whatever. Everything's an abstract concept. That doesn't make it fluid. The only place it's fluid, it's in your head. And if you're a little bit more weak-minded than the rest, it's real fucking fluid. But try as you might, you can't jump up and down and turn yourself into another sex. Some animals can. Some can, yes. They've diverged from the little tree of ours long ago. There's like some families of amphibians, when there's not enough like males or females around, they can flip. Yeah, okay, that can happen. Well, you're not a frog. There's some mollusks. But by and large, like 90% of the whole like taxa and fauna and all that shit in the tree, they're sexually dimorphic. They got A and B. They got, female, male, and they're real different. Real different. And they don't just migrate from one another. Couldn't get that concept down. And now, thank God, he's been able to get that shit published into papers, because now his little fucking experiment served as the basis for a shitload of published papers. And I'll bet you, if there is ever some actual rigorous study, you will find that at bottom, in terms of references, you will find there is no science. Nothing empirically based. Because every other goddamn study, it's basically, small population, highly suspect question, highly suspect methods of measurement, blah, blah, blah. But you've got a, pro-trans sort of activism group that wants to shout down everybody who wants to counter it, and wants to publicize everything that basically fits the narrative, because they want trans to be a thing. He wanted, first it was basically, gay marriage. I never got that one, by the way. Nothing against gay marriage, just marriage, right? It's a church thing. Never got why government was in the first place. Never got why you would seek that as a benefit, because fundamentally, I don't know if anybody's had to fill out taxes, but if you're single, you get X deductions. If she's single, she gets X deductions. And when you put them together, if you act like a family, you get less deduction than the A and the B added, right? So it ain't quite a benefit. But the only benefit is that now you can be, you can go to the hospital and say, I'm family, in extreme cases. That was a thing. But that got solved with the thing called domestic partner. So there isn't a fucking benefit there, right? Nothing about inheritance. I mean, you could solve all that shit. All of the benefits that come from marriage, you could solve them in alternate means, because marriage, the only place it mattered in terms of law or whatever, it was the government marriage part. And you could just say, you could enter contracts. You could do domestic partnerships. The only place it mattered was church. And you wonder why that is, that it was pushed so much. Because now, all of a sudden, why was marriage pushed? Not gay marriage, just marriage. Think about that. Here's the church. They're trying to basically instill some morality, and granted, they're manipulative just as much as, any postmodern. But what do they want? They wanted to basically encourage or discourage this other practice of the really powerful people getting a whole bunch of pussy and the little weak people getting none. You might have come across the term. Somebody tried to basically act like they've never heard it before and try to make it mean something else, but Jordan Peterson said it. Enforced monogamy. Now, that doesn't mean that the government goes around with a gun and grabs a girl and gives it to every single incel out there. No. Society enforces monogamism by basically shaming you into forcing you to get married. Getting questions like Simone de Beauvoir was getting, like, hey, when you get married, how's that little nice Sartre boy? Are you guys going to have some kids? When am I going to get some grandkids? That kind of shit. Or if you're, an asshole and you start cheating on your wife, you go talk to your dad about it, your dad's going to go, not going to go, hey, yeah, that's my boy. No, he's going to go, you're a fuckhead. Get back, get fucking serious. Get on the stick here. You got responsibilities, right? You got that. You got society basically pushing you into a committed, monogamous relationship, because the thing they figured out long ago, before the religion got a whole bunch of converts, was that young guys that wanted to fuck around and couldn't got into trouble. And old guys that would end up, with women, they all of a sudden, they got tamer. They got more civilized. All of a sudden, they were cool. They weren't going to get in a fight. They weren't ornery. They were just had problems at home. They didn't want to upset her. So it was all good. So all of a sudden, you had this calm effect on the population if everybody was like successfully hooked up. Every pea had its pod. Then you get gay marriage, right? And what does it do, right? Why do we want it? Well, because now, all of a sudden, you remember when like people were really pissed off about sex ed? That sex ed would teach like condoms? God damn it, why are you sexualizing my kids at like 14? Well, what's that age now? And what do they learn? Do they learn about just condoms and safe sex? No. They learn, well, you might think you're a boy, but you might not be. You might be a girl. You might be a whatever. You might be a unicorn. And, you can have a daddy, and you can have a mommy, and you can have mommy, daddy, mommy, daddy, mommy, daddy, whatever. So the concept of the nuclear family is gone. Now, who do you suppose doesn't like the idea of nuclear families? Not the small government types. No, they don't. They like family. They don't like government. The big government types, that is the family. Because, when a family teaches you things, you can't help it. Mao kind of got that one out of China because China was one of them real traditional cultures, right? On one hand, it worked perfectly well for him because you were already hierarchical. You were taught to respect your elders. If you were a son, you did what the elder said, period. Whatever mom said, whatever dad said, it went. Didn't matter if you were 70. And by extension, you had the family, the extended other family, which was the village, community. And then, of course, when, Chairman Mao came in, he just became sort of everybody's granddaddy. So on one hand, it worked really well because, everything had a place and a place for everything. That was the motto. But at the same time, he had a real hard time driving values. The more, the tinier, the more subtle values. He had a hard time driving that. The other side, the Rodina, the most favored son of the nation, all them people, dear leader, they didn't have as much trouble because they started going after the family big time. They shot religion. They shot, they encouraged healthcare. They forced everybody to work. All of a sudden, you had both parents working. Guess what? I mean, I was a latchkey kid for all my life. So, not granted, my dad died anyway, so I only had one parent to begin with. But most kids, they weren't all that like close to family because they were forced to always be alone, always be with peers, not with family. That was a tool. That was a tool of statecraft. Well, how do you get that done in America? You can't. So you have to like sap at it different ways, right? So not that I'm saddling the gays with it. It wasn't them. It was just because like the trans people. I mean, what? There's like a handful of them in the world. All of a sudden they start having all these issues. They need bathrooms. They need this. They need that. But then when you talk to actual trans people, they're kind of like, I kind of want to I want the DL. I don't really want the attention. I got enough troubles. And of course, now, who do you have bitching? You got the guy who's trans because he puts like a little bow in his butch haircut, right? And I'm like, you're not even fucking trying. You're just trying to claim a fucking status. And all of a sudden, even trans, what used to be transgender, has now changed because, it's like a hassle to get your dick chopped off. Now you got a new kind of trans, rapid onset transgenderism, which is, strangely enough, doesn't happen to boys, which is what the old one used to be primarily, boys thinking they were girls. No, this happens to girls. And it only happens to girls that actually are old enough and have been around peers that actually talk about this shit and they get educated about it. And all of a sudden they decide, I'm a boy. But they're not a boy as in, I'm going to have to like sculpt a dick out of flesh kind of boy. No. I'm going to just paint my hair blue and I'm going to say I'm a boy because I said I'm a boy and I'm a boy. And you can't tell me otherwise. That's got nothing to do with adolescent behavior. No. And pay no attention to the syndrome name, rapid onset gender dysphoria. Actually, surprisingly, they kept the gender dysphoria part. Not for the guys that chop the dick. No. Just for the ones they say, even though I got a dick, I'm a woman. Those are more valid. That's a real disturbance. But you can't say that they're not a woman. They are a woman. God damn it. You'll get banned off of Twitter. So yeah, that's the story. And again, let's go back to Mr. Money, because here's the problem. Even at 3, she's ripping the fucking dresses off. And by 13, she's ready to kill herself, has tried several times. And the parents are going nuts because they don't know what to do. And finally, the dad lets Brenda know that, well, actually, when you were born, you were a boy. So we've been kind of telling you this because of, tells him the story. And he loses his shit. But on the flip side, he's relieved because now he understands what the fuck, and he's been fed all these hormones and shit and whatever, right? And he's had the surgery, and he's had tits, and he's had everything. And he is relieved. He confesses later on that, he had this brief thought of going to find the guy who burned his dick off to shoot him, because he blamed him for his misfortune. Didn't blame Mr. John Money. No. He was afraid of him. But basically, by 1980, at 14, he's back to he picks a name, because obviously he wasn't Bruce. He never knew he was Bruce. So he didn't like Bruce. He picked David Reimer. So he went from Brenda to David. And then pursues all of the reversal surgeries. And by 1987, he reverses all of his transgender surgery. He gets a mastectomy. He gets a reconstruction surgery. He gets all that shit. And he's a boy. Not very functional, but fundamentally a boy by 87. And he begins to get very depressed, because he doesn't think he'll ever marry. But fortunately, by 1990, 3 short years later, he meets Joan Fontaine. And he marries her. And he's the adoptive father of her 3 kids. So he's, coping. But that fucked up period, the 10 years that he's had to suffer this shit, along with his brother, because it wasn't just him. His brother had to go to every single appointment. His brother had schizophrenia. Not sure if he was born with it or if it was sort of induced by the trauma, right? But in 2002, let's not jump ahead. In 1997, well, a little bit before that, actually, in the 90s, he meets Milton Diamond, who happens to be John Money's arch nemesis. He's also a sexologist. He's also all these things, but he thinks John Money's full of shit. And John Money's always got this John studies, and he's pointing to it, and always basically gets to thumb his nose at Diamond. And then, wouldn't you know it, Diamond runs into Mr. Reimer, who basically proceeds to tell him everything. Then they get Mr. Sigmundsson, who's basically the psychiatrist, and basically he's able to recreate, get a full download of everything that John Money did in the thing and how the treatment was and all this shit. And basically he's able to publish a complete reversal of that entire study, basically saying, not only did it not do what it said, he faked all the data and all of the battery of psychological tests. This kid did not grow up a girl. Period. He saw a complete and natural reversal. There was never the behavior. All of this shit you've been taught as canon is bullshit, because this asshole lied. And because of that, because he kind of goes public with this, even though, because the John study never published their names, and then, he kind of feels, on one hand, David feels like the weight is off his chest, but he's struggling. He's beginning to get abuse problems, whatever. Then some guy wants to do a story on him and makes him a little bit of money, because he publishes a book and eventually does a documentary. Well, he was already in the down and outs. He broke up with Joan. Now he's really having problems, because his brother basically started taking some pills and killed himself in 2002. And now that the movie had come out and all this shit, and he's got a little bit of money, he invests it in, substances and whatnot, because that's what you do when you've got major damage. And by 2004, he just gets a sawed-off shotgun and blows his head off. So Mr. Money, Mr. John Money, after his illustrious work, took 2 children and managed to get them both to kill themselves while they were young. One, after being severely tortured and flipped and flopped on his sex. And the other one, who was the untouched one, killed himself even earlier. And, thank God, 2 years later, Mr. Money dies from some complications with Parkinson. And guess what? Never, ever, ever apologized for faking this bullshit study. Never said boo. Never retracted. Never felt remorse. Never did any public act of contrition. In fact, he's a fucking saint in the gender bender community, right? Because he established the canon. But he was a pure asshole. He was a pure degenerate. I don't mean degenerate as in, just the part about how he liked fucking kids. No, I'm saying he didn't care about death. He didn't care about the lives he basically impaired. That's just horrible. How the fuck do you justify having this amongst your pantheon of saints? Really? How? How the fuck is that possible? That's it. That's my rant. That's my rant on Well, I guess it went off of the whole capitalism dialectic, and it got into some twisty territory. So, whatever. If you like this video, comment on the first half or the second half or either half, or if you tell me to fuck off, go ahead and comment on that too. Talk to you soon.